First off, Dr. Brown, Dr. Kendrick Brown is Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs at Morehouse College. He has more than 20 years of experience as a professor and senior administrator, having served students and faculty with distinction at several private liberal arts colleges on the West Coast and in the Midwest. Dr. Stephane Dunn is the co-founder and academic coordinator of the Cinema, Television, and Emerging Media Studies programs at Morehouse College. Research and writing focus on race, gender, class, American and African American culture, particularly film, television, and literature. She is a frequent moderator, consultant, and guest commentator, appearing on various media platforms such as NPR and Pushback, and as I stated, a good friend of the Auburn Avenue Research Library. So with no further ado, I turn it over to you, Dr. Dunn.
Thank you, Morris. Thank you so much. The Reverend Don King moved from behind the podium with the mic in one hand and his white handkerchief in the other. The 3 pulpit steps creaked in complaint. Out from behind the podium, he was huge. He stopped where the family sat on the first bench in the center, right in front of Big Pete and Shayla. The hum and rustle quieted. Our children don't value life. Don't even care about their own lives. How we get that way? We done got so corrupt and bankrupt in our souls, we raising children who don't know they got a soul. Say they ain't got no jobs. The school system broke. They ain't got no hope, so the street get them. Reverend Don King moved in from the casket, blocking its view. The greasy sweat on his forehead shone brighter as he preached in a sing-song voice. But I remember a time. I remember the time when didn't have no jobs. We worked sun up and sun down, but didn't get no pay. A mama couldn't read a bedtime story to a child. Papa couldn't even read a word in the Bible to the family. They catch you with a book or trying to learn one little word. They might beat you or cut your hands off. I remember the time we couldn't even name ourselves, couldn't even count on raising our own children. The deaconess and scrub standing by in case someone fainted or needed more fanning turned on like a battery-operated dial. I'd seen people at church get happy in the Lord all my life, dancing in place and waving their arms in the air, but it was strange that it was going on at Little Petey's funeral, as if it was a regular Sunday church service. Reverend Don King rested a big hand on one hip as if the preaching brought on pain and waved the white handkerchief in the other. Soon as the spirit got somebody whipped up and showing out like the Reverend Don King did, Dontay and I would usually get to winking at each other and holding in laughter. Reverend Don King was hyped, and he went on preaching. We lived day in and day out with the lashes at our back. But in the meantime, we kept on praying, kept right on believing, and kept on hoping. I said, in the meantime, we kept right on somehow, loving each other and trying to live. We come out of hell right on into Jim Crow, and still we kept on trying to live. The preacher's voice grew raspy. He lifted his heavy arm and brought it down on the coffin and wiped at the river of dripping sweat with a handkerchief. We raised some life-loving children, children who hoped, dreamed, marched to some better times. They say things is worse now. Children got so much mess around them. Guns and drugs on every corner, and the video games and the TV and the internet doing the raising instead of mom and daddy. But I do believe, I want you to hear me now, I do believe, we done forgot some things. Ain't never been no time since the first African was kidnapped and brought to this place. Ain't never been no time, I say, in case you don't know, between the lash and the lynch rope. The black man and the woman and the little black boy and girl ain't lived in violent times. Still, we kept on going and loved one another. Still, we hung on. Is there a witness in here today? Anybody in here know how we fought for life? How we wanted our babies to live and discover a better life? His questions hit me hard right then, and that old gospel song line popped into my mind again. This too shall pass. The Reverend Don King wasn't through with us yet, though I wished he was. He turned his back to us and crumpled to his knees, slightly leaning toward the casket. He looked like a huge fallen bear. The church blew up like firecrackers. A sea of black hats rocked together from side to side, and white-gloved hands waved. Others sent up fist-pump praises to the ceiling. The deacons hopscotched in place, and the choir stood and took turns humming and singing, Jesus, over and over in unison. I really wanted to cry again. Somebody shouting sounded like gibberish to me, but at church they called it speaking in tongues. I translated this to mean it was a language no one but I guess God could understand. Another deaconess caught the spirit and swayed past the flower girl pew and back down the center aisle, hands on her hips, head thrown back, shouting, "My Lord!" Another woman chanted. My belly churned and twisted into knots. I closed my eyes and concentrated. Breathe. I was living the fourth worst day of my life. The first was the day I found out my father was gone forever. The second was the day at the cemetery where we left Daddy waiting to be covered by the dirt. The third was the day little Petey died, when I stood over him, his eyes boring into mine as he lay there dead on the sidewalk. The preaching was finally done. Thank you.
Dr. Dunn, my goodness, thank you for leading us off with this piece. I have so many questions that I can ask, but let me start off with something that I think is inspired by what you just read, which is the sense of voice and being able to express voice and giving expression to powerful words. And I guess I'll start with a basic question. What inspired you to write Snitchers?
Well, so I think that it was many years, probably starting from when I was a child. The loss of people due to violence. People I went to school with. Hello, can you hear me now? I'll just be louder. People I went to school with who died too young, drugs or by the police, the crime that was never solved. I mean, it's in every hometown, way before this era of it being recorded on video. And it was definitely what happened September 11th, many years ago. But it was also things like, my younger sister's best friend getting shot in the back at 22 for supposedly being in the wrong place, right? I guess or vice versa. And it's just this whole thing of trying to figure out, how do we live like sitting ducks to random violence all the time? So that question, and if we can't deal with it and we're adults, imagine in terms of children and young adults, trying to make sense to a school shooting. You go to school and then at 2 o'clock, half your class is dead. So I think, yeah.
I definitely appreciate that. I'm thinking, you don't typically see themes of violence and how we respond to violence and seeking justice in young adult novels. And I'm curious, what is it about this particular genre that really lent itself to what you wanted to express and what came through in your book, Snitchers?
So it's a funny thing, and I don't know about you all, but I was pretty bookish. So when I was 11 through 18, I was reading everything from Judy Blume to I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, to all of these books that Little Women. I read everything. Nancy Drew, so no wonder Nancy Drew appears in the book, right? And it's a funny thing because young adult is almost like this weird category that I resist. Like even when I was shopping the book and they were like, what category? I was really reluctant with the young adult because there are books that are labeled young adult, especially now in contemporary young adult. It's really rife with all kinds of themes. That's why I think they're popular for banned books lists, right? And it's because there really are heavyweight themes. like loss, like violence, like sexuality. There are heavyweight themes in young adult literature, but when you think about it, even The Hunger Games it's really young adult, so to speak, right? So there are a lot of mature books already in that genre, and I think sometimes the category is misleading, because that's why so many movies are made out of a lot of young adult novels, and they're really quite mature, as we find out when they make it to, the screen. And
that genre, like you said, it does have a lot of flexibility to it and can really hold a lot. What really struck me as I was reading parts of Snitchers is that it provided that expression of that time, that pivotal moment in someone's life, but at the same time, it enabled for connection with culture. And I think that comes through really clear. That came through in the reading that you just made, that you just shared with us. But it also comes through throughout the book. And thinking about Black culture and thinking about the features of Black culture, thinking about history, community, family, and how important that is for Nia's journey in the book. And thinking about how did you want to make sure that readers really appreciated that aspect of it and how it really comes through in her story.
So, I mean, I love that question, because I think aren't we all such a composite and a sort of a culmination of our recent past we don't even know, we're kind of detached to from, that's ancestral. And I've always been fascinating about what I don't know in terms of those close connections. But I'm that person who I see it as a blessing now, but I didn't always know it. There's a such thing as people's voices being in your ear. So my grandmother's voice is in my ear. My auntie's voices are in my ear. My mother's voice is in my ear. And it's funny, I didn't know that it would enrich my writing the way it has, but they appear a lot, actually. And it's really, a blessing, and that's that cultural voice that is most immediate and intimate. But then there's the culture, like the church culture that I was one of those that was dragged to church on Sunday, Friday, and don't let there be a revival. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, for many years, and praise the Lord, mommy. And I was that, child that, the church culture was a ground for getting used to things like speaking in public, because, we had to, say the Sunday school thing at the end, right? I mean, and it was just a great place to be an observer, because people were when we were children, we cracking up, because like, oh, there go Mother Wales. Oh, she about to do the leg. She about to, and so there's all these characters, right, who you can expect them to do their thing on Sunday earnestly. But for us as children, they were, great entertainment, but I find them so sacred now in my memory. So there are so many little pieces of them in Snitchers, right? In the character, right, who is the grandmother of Miracle Ruth, who's always got a handy scripture for you. Because there are no people like that. They know they got a scripture for everything. There's a line, say that, so there's little pieces of people like that were the church mothers and the sisters, and I'm like, what a blessing to have that culture. But then there's the culture of, slavery and everything in our history that we can't even teach. Now we're circling back to you can't even teach it hardly. And I don't even know what you can do as a K through 12 teacher right now to teach it. So that figures, because I feel like it's an opportunity to connect this generation to that when we write things that are in that space or from that perspective, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And the themes that you pull together, the complexities that you weave into your story, my thought is I've read some incredible works that affect me powerfully, and I always wonder when I read that, when I encounter powerful work, how long did it take to write it? What was the challenge that you had forever? What was the challenge that you experienced when you were trying to write it? What was the easy part? How did it feel to try to weave it all together? I'm always curious about that process.
I'm curious about that process too, because I haven't refined it yet. So when you come up with a neat answer, I'm going to borrow it and use it. So I always cringe when people ask, well, how do you get it done? Because I'm like, I don't know. Because there are writers that I love, and I go and hear them speak, and they say these marvelous things like, I get up at 4 a.m. and I work 3 hours. I don't do that. I can't. It is not my life to get up. I mean, I have to get up at 5:50 a.m. in the morning, normally 5 days a week, take my son to school. I'm not getting up at 3 to write. And then there are times where it's like, well, basketball practice or whatever it is going to it's going to intervene in an evening's, right? I don't have that life. So I always tell, I guess myself, what I tell students that, one, writers write. And it doesn't matter how you get it done, because yours might be in pieces, or the weekend is the only time you can write between X, Y, and XY time. It might mean you got to take 5 extra years to write that, because that's the nature of it. But I think the main thing is the consistency. And I think in my head, writing since and my mom knows this, I've been writing since I was 9 or 10, and she has these little awful things that better not come to light, and little short stories, me taking a stab at my little stories back then. But I think when you feel like you must do something, like you must write, it's just like if you're an artist who sings, right, you sing, right, even though it's not really convenient to life, because really writing is not convenient to most people who work, okay, and have to, and I'm sitting up here with my boss, so that has a double meaning. I've seen. And so I'm not jockeying for more time to write. I'm just saying that it is very difficult, and I will add, it's difficult for people who are taking care of people. So you're working, if you're taking care of children, or you're taking care of parents, and that makes it even more difficult to do it. I started writing Snitchers when I was breastfeeding. So I can only type with one hand now. Because when I was breastfeeding, and I did almost 2 years, he would be in this arm, and I learned to type with this arm. And now I cannot even type with 2 arms. I don't text with 2 hands. It's the weirdest thing ever that I don't know is weird till somebody says, a student says, are you aware that you're typing with, but that's how it happened, is because the first 10 pages of writing this, first 20, I think, I was breastfeeding. And that was back 2011, and then I left it because I was working on other projects, and I was dedicating myself to Morehouse. It's my first.
Understandable.
That's the need to do, because that's first, Dr. Brown, Provost Dr. Brown. And so I was like, I will come back to that when I have time and have devoted myself sufficiently to the cause that is the noble mission there. And so I went with that. I'll just take longer to write it. Y'all see how I did that?
That was skillful. That was skillful. But definitely understand what you're saying when it comes to putting the story or committing the story to word. You take the time that needs to be taken when you're able to take it to express yourself and to express your voice. So that makes sense, even when Morehouse might be calling you to do other things.
Which isn't often, of course.
No, of course not. No, not in the least. I want to explore something that I thought was really fascinating in your book, and that was the pen pal relationship that Nia had with Alima.
Yes.
And what's really interesting, it feels like it's a dialogue that's happening within the book. And what struck me, or what I wanted to ask you about, was those connections that you saw between who people might look at as being, oh, these are really different people. And yet, there's a connection that they form through their letters, and it's very evident as the book is going on. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, the connections you saw, and then how that really played a part in the story too.
Yeah. So the one thing that was really important to me is not to isolate contemporary violence to the Black community, because it's not, right, at all. No matter how much we might hear about a particular city, for example, like Chicago, which I grew up close to, not far from, as sort of the representative of, sort of U.S. urban violence. It's just a terribly violent world, and children all over the world are victims of it, are growing up in it, are having their lives transformed by it. And for me, it was interesting to explore that as a bonding point for this Palestinian girl, roughly the same age, and my, protagonist, who is the same age and a Black American, right? And them having these letters that are culturally specific, but their meeting point is the place that they both had their worlds upended by violence. Each has lost a parent to it. And so that was one of the things that it's not just about violence in the community I'm most intimate with. It is about living in a violent world. And really, I don't know how everyone else feels about it, but sometimes don't you wonder, why is our reality so violent? Like, so there are things like that really animate my thinking. And I realized that it's been a thread in my work, because I've written articles about Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and pieces like that. And I realized that, wow, this is a continuing thing. And I think Snitchers was just sort of a fuller exploration of feeling very much like we have this inevitable sense of violence, but it should not be that way. Like, our resistance is sort of low, right, to resisting it.
It's interesting because as you're bringing up this important theme, there are some folks who would say, but hold it, why would you write about that kind of theme in a young adult novel? And I guess the question I would have is, what do you say to those folks who are like, kids shouldn't be exposed to this, they shouldn't have to read about this? I suspect what the answer would be, but I always like to be explicit, and I'm curious what you would say to those folks.
Same thing you're thinking, like, and I will just say that what they shouldn't be exposed to is a school shooting. What they shouldn't be exposed to is being in their parents' arms and then somebody drives by and shoots at them, and then it's, a 3-year-old was shot while in the arms of the parent. They shouldn't be getting shot at because someone has a road rage moment, follows someone and just shoots aimlessly into a car, of course, and doesn't even strike the adult, strikes the child in the back seat of the car. Right? And it's crazy to me because it happens so much every day, all the time. I began to sort of collect those things. Like, I was tagging, but then it just became too much. I was tagging every day. It was in St. Louis, it was here, it was in a small town in Mississippi, it was in Dallas, it was Houston, it was Indiana, it was, Chicago, it's just so much. And in none of those headlines are children missing from the violence. Like, they are sitting ducks to it all the time.
And another piece that, of course, is so incredibly important for the story is we're talking about a young woman. We're talking about a young woman and her working through her grief and also the anger and wanting to make meaning and have meaning from this. And I wanted to ask you about that inflecting the story as well, and how that plays a role in understanding what Snitchers should be about and what people should get from it.
Right, sure. So the weird thing about it is that we use that word justice, right? It means different things to people. And my characters, of course, they're not yet adults, but they understand that it's not right, what has happened, and they don't want to feel powerless in it, right? And they feel that the adults are just not in control of this thing. They are not doing enough. They're not, right? But there's also this sense of, even if you pursue a killer, right? Say you catch said killer, and maybe the killer gets convicted. Family and people still have to deal with the person is dead and not coming back, ever. And that's right? That's the thing. So there's oh yes, but so in that sense, you don't know if it's justice, because if a 5-year-old is gunned down, I don't know that many of us with mom feels, even though the person is behind jail, that it's justice. Because they're gonna miss age 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and children, and all of these things, and life, and right? And so it's just that it's not this neat answer, but it's an exploration of living in a world where you have so little control, it seems, right, over the violent nature of things. But guess what? It's like, you know, like the father says in the book, you know, bullets ain't got no name on it. They land with it. They don't have any name on it. They can hit anyone. And then that's it. And how fair is that?
And living with that understanding that that could happen in the world, and yet still being able to find, like you mentioned, a sense of empowerment, being able to find a way forward. To me, as I was reading through a lot of the book, it was really trying to find your way forward despite everything else, and holding to what it is that could give you strength even as you were being challenged, even as you were struggling. And to me, I think that's a pretty powerful message that comes through in your book. And I'm wondering about, you know, that sort of theme, even as you're acknowledging reality.
Yeah, it's hopeful. I mean, it's hopeful. I mean, I don't think that, even though I write reality, whether it's nonfiction or it's at times, I'm always hopeful. I think there's always a sense of longing for and having an alternative vision. And what's cool about children and young adult is that we do attach a certain level of, they're not as jaded and as disillusioned. Like, you know, we say things like, oh, they're amazingly, you know, sort of, they can rebound or what. I mean, part of why we say that is because, you know, we think that they have the benefit of a certain level of youth that will allow them to be able to rebound or to go on in a way that, you know, might still be a good path. But I think that that's the hopeful part, right? That they represent that they're not just going, this has happened, and so now we move on, right? So much has happened to them in the book, right, already. But here's where they go, no, stop. And if other folks can't get this, meaning the adults, right, then we can do this for him, because this could have been either one of us.
I'm thinking about how powerful this work is, and that, of course, it required time to pull together, to weave into the narrative, into what the story you wanted it to be. I'm curious about, well, what are you taking from this for the next work?
A lot.
Not that I'm trying to put pressure on you or anything,
lot.
but you know, this is a talent. So
Yeah.
Curious about what your next work and how the lessons you learned from pulling this one together, both writing it and the process.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Oh man, a lot. I mean, you learn so much from every imperfect work that you finish. I mean, you get more comfortable with narrative, and you're already, you start to plan for like, oh, in the next one, right, you know, swing this way more, pull back here. I mean, so it's a learning process, even when you've been writing. If you write in a genre that is not the one you exercise the most, then you're constantly striving for exercise. And the more you exercise, it really is just like the body. The more that you find that your narrative storytelling, right, gets more comfortable. And when it gets more comfortable, then you're able to have the flow and the threads be tighter, and you can kind of see that from work to work. So I'm definitely, as I'm working on the other things, and of course right now I have projects that I write in different genres. So that's also part of, I'm a screenwriter, and I write a lot of nonfiction, and of course now this is the fiction book. So there's, a short story in the works, and there's a children's story that's already written that is under review, which is the first children's story for Edwin Moses, which we worked on together. So that children's book is a younger children's book, illustrated. And so it'll probably be the next one. But then there's a short story based very much out of that church culture. But I think it's the more that I exercise it, and certainly this was exercise, right? And it teaches you stamina, and it teaches you that you can't publish anything unless you're comfortable with a certain level of imperfection, but also if you're comfortable with thinking of yourself as an evolving artist always. Like, you never arrive anyway. You get stronger, you get better, you see where this is, this one's flowing differently. But I think to be a writer, you have to be really comfortable with evolution. You have to be really comfortable with not being there in some sort of mythic there space. Because you never get there, you're always exercising. Do you know what I mean? You're always exercising, and that frees you up to be able to write, because you know that self-confidence and feeling intimidated by taking it on can stop you in your tracks. It just can stop creative work like that. Or nonfiction, it will stop you every time. So you have to have a certain level of being comfortable with your own imperfection as an artist, as a writer, and also with the imperfection of the process. Knowing that if you stick with it, you're gonna come out with something imperfectly beautiful that is worth being out there. And then you're going to be stronger, and then you can pour that into the next thing. If that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. And it makes sense in the respect of, you're not looking for destinations. You're looking for journey. You're looking for an ever-going process.
Exactly.
That enables you to learn, but enables you to keep developing.
And you're an intellectual and writer, so you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. You do all this research, you write the book or the article. I mean, you come back to it sometimes. Yeah. You're like, oh, saying you might like, I should have included. I might have expanded. I might have tightened there. I wish I had, this. I mean, there's that. Mm-hmm. In addition to the feeling of achievement and like, you're so glad you hung with that to get it there. But then you got to let it go. I mean, it is like birthing a baby in a different kind of way, far less painful in some ways. But it's got its pains, and you do have to let it go and let it out. And this trust that there is something in it that is of value, that is, worthy of being out in the universe, and hey, let it talk as it will to whomever.
Mm-hmm. And hope that folks get from it strength, challenge, growth.
Exactly.
Along the way.
Exactly. Just as the children in the novel, I mean, they're coming to realizations, right? Some very painful throughout the novel. So I think it's the perfect metaphor. As a writer, you're doing the same thing. So when people ask me, how do you get so much done? First of all, I never feel like I'm getting enough done. I don't know if that's just a weird, right? I mean, I know you share that feeling. Like, you never feel like you're getting enough done, or you feel like I should be further along in my work. I should be further along in that project. This project should not be hanging on the shelf so long. This should be, you're always feeling that way. But it can also paralyze you, so that you finish nothing. And you've got to finish something. You've got to hang with something long enough to ride it there, let it take its journey, and then you can move on to something else. The worst thing we can do is be arrested by our own fears, or by the overwhelming feeling that there's so much we want to do that we can do nothing. And then you won't do the little bit that you can do. This Snitchers is my little bit right now.
Yeah, we should all be blessed with that kind of little bit. We really should be. What I'm thinking is, do you mind reading another selection for the audience, and then maybe we can go to some Q&A. And
because when we gotta get you out of here, because I know you were telling me, how hard I work at Morehouse, and he does. Trust. I felt so guilty.
Don't feel
guilty. He was so
guilty.
Nice, and he was like, I would just love to do it with you, and then I felt like, oh my goodness. He sends emails at 4 a.m. in the morning, so I know he's. I know he's working.
No. And this is inspirational, and you got my complete attention, so not a problem.
All right. So one of the things that I love about some of my favorite writers, including James Baldwin, and I mean his nonfiction, of course, like The Fire Next Time, but He also wrote beautiful fiction, as you know, and one of my favorite stories of his is Sonny's Blues. I teach it often, and I'm always loving how we weave stories within stories, and so I think this is a little bit of an example of this one. Nana Mae, I said, surprising myself. Will you tell me about Nzinga? Nana Mae's fingers paused. So you didn't forget that story, huh? Thought you was too grown around here for my stories. She laughed, pleased. No, ma'am, I wouldn't forget that one, I answered. What got that on your mind all of a sudden? I couldn't say exactly. Maybe because things were simpler when Nana Mae used to tell me stories. My father was alive, and I lived for him, and I loved that story. I don't know, I said. I just always remember that story. One day, Nzinga gets sent to collect flowers for the mistress, Nana Mae began. She paused to explain. Now that's the white lady, call herself presuming to own Nzinga and the other black folk on the plantation. Anywho, so the mistress got this big company coming to the big house. Now the first time she told me this story, I had interrupted her. What's the big house, I had asked. This time Nana Mae teased me. You remember me telling you that the big house was sometimes a mansion or not, depending on how poor or rich the slave owner was, and it tended to be white. The white folks lived there. Some of the black folk they call themselves owning the house slaves might sleep on the floor somewhere nearby so they could come running anytime the mistress or master got a mind for them to do something. The rest of the black people didn't live in nothing like that big house. They stayed in shacks, usually poor excuses for shelter not fit for human beings decent to live. I nodded my yes. I hadn't forgotten at all. And I had seen pictures of plantations in social studies class since then. Nana Mae massaged the back of my head and went on. Now this mistress, like baskets of pretty wildflowers all around the house, make the house smell sweet and look pretty, she was known to have the best flowers on display. Now this was something this young girl about your age, Nzinga, loved to do. Nana Mae skipped quizzing me as she had during her first telling of the story when I was probably 7. You know why Nzinga loved being sent to gather flowers? At first, I didn't know, but I guessed that she loved flowers. Of course, I had been wrong. 'Cause she liked being able to run around for that little while feeling free and alone in that beautiful spot, Nana Mae explained. Out there in this little forest area where the flowers grew so pretty on each side of a running stream. See, Nzinga had lived on that one plantation all her young life, and that's all she ever got to see. The big house and the fields where the other black folk worked from sunup till the sun went down. Every day was about what the white folks made them do, day in and day out. Nzinga ran around all hours for the mistress and the black women who had to do the cooking and the cleaning and so on. But when she went to the field, Nzinga always stayed on the one side just like instructed. But that day, the flowers there just weren't good enough for that picky mistress of hers, let alone her company. She noticed the beautiful flowers across the way on the other side of the running stream. I mean, they just seemed to call to her. It was like a parade of colors dressing up that other side. For that first time, she noticed how the bushes, sitting a little bit further back, grew the kind of purple and white flowers that smelled like a sweet perfume. They were Ma'am Sue's favorite. Ma'am Sue. When I first heard Nana Mae say it, I had laughed, thinking it was a funny name for somebody's mother. Then Nana Mae explained that as well. Like a lot of children born in slavery, Nzinga had been separated from her parents. Ma'am Sue was at the plantation when she was born, and after her African mother was sold away, Ma'am Sue took care of Nzinga. So Ma'am Sue came to be the only mama she ever knew. I had answered by shutting up then. Nana Mae pulled the two pieces of my hair together and pressed close to my scalp into another perfect braid. So now, Nzinga looks down, see, and she sees how slow the stream was moving, how the sun rays from the sky glitter on the surface of the water. She sees her own face staring back at her. The water wasn't that deep, and it was so clear she could see the dirt and the rocks. She sees something else too she hadn't paid no mind to before. This tangled mess of skinny tree branches on the other side reaching across, touching each other. Well now, the next thing you know, she reaches out, grab holds of a tangle of branches. It's a little high, so she kind of hops up there and catches hold with both hands. The water's not deep now, but she's still scared of falling in. She tiptoes in. It's so cold. You know how it is when you jump in the pool and don't know it's going to be ice cold. It surprised those bare feet of hers. The water soaked the bottom of her old throwaway dress the mistress had given her. But that wet dress would get her a sure whipping. So she went on across the stream, still hanging on to the tangle of branches until there was an opening. And Nzinga got really scared, standing there near the forbidden side of the stream, nothing to hold on to. And then she remembers she left the basket of sitting on the other side. She'd done all that work of getting to the good flowers. So she wades on. She puts the foot in front of the other, and she keeps crossing that stream until she gets close enough to grab a tree hanging within reach. A few steps later, she's where she's never been in her entire life, on the other side. And once she's there, the first thing that catches her eyes isn't the flowers. No, instead she sees the parting in the flowery bushes off to one side, and she goes towards it and then stops, trying to make out what it is. It's a path lined with trees and that pretty purple and white flower. She recalls hearing the older folks on the plantation say there was a path to freedom across the river. Only nobody that they knew so far had been able to take it all the way to freedom. They'd been brought back. And Nzinga had never known what water. Never ever occurred to her maybe the stream where the pretty flowers grew was the water. The path is narrow, but she's small, a slip of a thing, the mistress said. And Nzinga thought of Mam Sue, who was, as you know, not just the only mama Nzinga had known, but also the master's favorite slave. Mam Sue took care of Nzinga and every sick body on the plantation, including the master and mistress and every child with no parents like Nzinga. Mam Sue had been allowed to name her Nzinga, even though mistress said it sounded like a witch name. Nzinga's mama had whispered the name to Mam Sue the morning she'd been sold away. Now, Nzinga did not want to leave Mam Sue, but the old woman was sick. The white doctor had come and said there was nothing to be done. And the other folks on the plantation whispered how Mam Sue's time was coming. Nzinga did not want to think about life or the plantation without Mam Sue. She walked a little closer to the tiny opening of the path, and she just stood there thinking. She recalled something Mam Sue had said to her not long ago as Nzinga spooned water down her throat. "If I had to do it again," she whispered in a weak voice to Nzinga, "I'd run on down that path. Oh, yes, Jesus. Just run on down that path." So Nzinga did. She moved a little in the day, but mostly at night, hiding in the bushes and trees, getting her skin scratched and bruised and her feet blistered up. Every second, she was terrified the mistress and master had somebody after her, so she kept going. I still couldn't imagine this. Alone in the dark woods, all by herself at night, nobody taking care of her, and bad guys and dogs looking for her. A fact that we got during a brief section on slavery and social studies. Nana May, did Nzinga make it? She laughed, tickled at my usual old question, and answered, "Well, think about it like this. That day, the flowers didn't satisfy on the side she was supposed to stay on, the one she always stayed on. Now, ain't no coincidence. Those beautiful flowers on the other side commanded her attention on this one day, and she stepped across that water and seized the path. The path. That's not happenstance. That's the universe calling, baby. And when you answer, yes, when the universe calls, you step on into your destiny. And everybody's got one, too. In my story, Nzinga follows hers, and nobody catches that girl. And in real life, I believe, I know she corrected herself. Plenty more made it in real life.
Well, we certainly have time for questions, and I believe there's a mic right over here if folks need a little help projecting, but would love to hear if folks have any questions for Dr. Dunn. Couple hands, please. Let's start in the front and then we'll work to the back.
I want to know how you came up with the title.
So, of course, Snitchers is a play on snitch, don't snitch, because I'm so aware of it as something that is taboo, that you don't do, right? Especially in a lot of communities. And I was fascinated by the ideal of sort of flipping it and having these children sort of like having their kind of secret mission where like they name themselves, the Snitchers, and they're growing up in a community where, they know about the rumors of people and what happened to them if they snitch. And so I was trying to play around with that, but I also was trying to interrogate that, right? That our whole ideology around what snitching is and what it's not. Because we do know it keeps us, in some communities, right, prisoner to a certain kind of violence. And I really wanted to sort of, explore that.
All right, thank you. I think there was a hand right behind you, actually. Go ahead, please.
Okay, how much, you're so, the not being prisoner, not being stuck by perfection, and getting to the place where imperfection, just to be, there's a saying, perfection is the enemy of progress. So I suspect, I'm just guessing, there was a period of time, maybe it was when you were trying to multitask, type, and write at the same time, that you gave in to the universe and just let it be. Because I think when we're young, we're taught perfection. And how did you get there?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's not the time for certain projects, like, right? And sometimes they really do call to you. Like, you could start something and then you put it down and you start something else and you actually finish that something else because there's, whether it's the right mind space or emotional space or whatever that is, you're not right, like, there to do that, particular work. But then the key is, though, I think you can't always wait for it to call you or you never get things done sometimes. You kind of create the call by working on it. Because when you work on something, of course, it becomes real and starts to manifest, and characters become real, or whatever you're writing, it becomes very important. But I do think there are times when you go through some transitions in personal life and space, and that's sort of like, there's a calling to you, like, I gotta finish that. And then you let other things sit. Because it's very hard to juggle too many things at once, and you shouldn't. I mean, there are times, I tell students all the time, you can't do everything at once, but what you do is, you're like, this is the project that I'm focusing on right now, and bringing to a certain level. And then when it gets to, like, you have a whole draft, you're revising it, you may be able to go now to this other project a little bit, right, and sort of nudge it into the, because they're at different stages. But I think for me, it was getting that right, because it was difficult once I became a mom. That was not, I didn't have 8 hours a day, all day Saturdays to write. It was a whole different world to be a working mom and fit in writing to me. And so it took, I think, learning to juggle, which was a few years in there before I could kind of, still ain't halfway right, but I managed to move it, right, to keep it moving. It's the thing.
Go ahead.
Hello. So, as your colleague
Friend.
and your friend, I will say I am in awe of you. You make it seem very easy, like you'll see the Woman King on Tuesday, and by Friday you have a piece of the paper that's very thoughtful and considered about that movie, about the feminist revolution at that. So I think that you are downplaying all the great work you do, and I think it is admirable. Watching you do all that. So I'll say that. And number two is my literary question. So we've talked about Walter Mosley. I love a Walter Mosley. Just for Black, mystery writers, how influenced were you by people like Walter Mosley in terms of writing this,
I love that question, because I love some Walter Mosley.
I know.
I love Walter Mosley. I chased him down in New Orleans at a convention. Yes, I did too, because he was at a convention, and it had to do with Snitchers. I was there because I had won the Eleanor T. Bland Award for the first 20 pages. I'd written like 25 pages, and I submitted it to this award honoring a pioneering writer. You should read her stuff. Eleanor T. Bland. There's this organization that's called Sisters in Crime that started this fund that honors her. She wrote like 12 books or something. I mean, very prolific. And I was at this convention because of this award, and Walter Mosley was the guest speaker. So I'm standing outside of the hotel. And I know some Walter Mosley down the road. I said, that looks like, right, he's coming towards me, the hat, the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, it's Walter Mosley. It's Walter Mosley? He's about to walk right past me. And so, of course, I did the whole thing, don't bother him. He's having this, this is peace of man's. But, he goes in the door and I go, well. And so I follow him in the hotel, and he just sits down in front of me in the middle of the hotel, like chilling. So I go and, timidly, like, Walter Mosley, hello, like one of your big, that whole thing. And I even say to him, I'm sorry, I'm not saying anything original. He starts to laugh. He's like, that's original. And we start to talk, and, and then he gave me his number, which I lost because I did not have a phone. Because I was like, must come to Morehouse and he said, oh, I would love to do that. But the answer to that is very much so, because I did grow up reading. There was a period when I read a lot of Nancy Drew when I was a really young reader. I was reading Nancy Drew and, these other mysteries, and it obviously stuck because like Nancy Drew makes her own appearance, right, in the novel. And then as I got older, of course, it was people like Walter Mosley that I'm fascinated by. I mean, I think he does some of the best writing, and he writes in different genres and not just the Easy Rawlings series as well. He's very prolific in all kinds of writing. And I love writers who I think like me, they stretch, because I'm a playwright, I'm a screenwriter, I write nonfiction, because you realize different parts of your self and the truths you want to explore in different forms, in different genres. Sometimes it has to come out in a play. Sometimes it has to come out in a nonfiction piece. And sometimes it's in a short story. And so that's what I love about him, not only his detective, his mystery, also his range, I love a lot.
Yeah, he's incredible. He really is.
We're going to get him to Morehouse. I'm so sorry.
We gotta. All right, I see a hand back over here, please.
So kind of what you just said about range, how do you determine the way you're going to tell a story?
Oh, that's a really good story. And by the way, these two, Dr. Corey Claiborne, who's my dear friend back there, who just asked the question, and then also my dear colleague friend, Mickey Harris, who are both very brilliant scholars at Morehouse. I'm very humble, but they are very brilliant. Check out Professor Mickey Harris's work in the National Geographic, for example. She's like that. She is a photo artist, journalist. So I just wanted to say that. But it's weird because I tell students that too, because they come up with stories, and sometimes I say to them, I don't think it's a screenplay though. I think this is this might be a fiction piece, or it might be, but it's not for, right. I think that I've gotten fairly good because I know the genres somewhat well enough to so the screenplay that I have that is with Sean Penn's production company, which is called Chicago 66, is a story that's set in the year that Dr. King was in Chicago, coincidentally right around the same time that my mom as a young girl came up to Chicago and lived a couple of blocks away. And that I never thought of it anything as other than a screenplay. Do you know what I mean? And Snitchers I thought of as a novel, but we're having some conversations about the adaptation. I retained my film and TV rights because that's the thing. Isn't that right, Attorney Yeager? I did that. He was like, make sure you, attorney, entertainment, attorney there, Attorney Nancy Yeager, like, keep those film and TV rights. Because so I think certain things you write, there is a way in which they can serve different genres. But I also think that's why it's okay to explore different genres, knowing that one may not fulfill all of your voices in a way, you know what I mean? And all the stories that you have. And I don't know if there's some secret sauce to determining which genre to go to, right? You know what I mean? But I think we know sometimes when something is a written piece and something is a visual piece. So like right now, you know, the short film is one Sunday morning. That's the film I'm just finishing. It's a short film. I tried to write an essay about it, and it was about something, this has to do with like the legacy of rape in my family. I tried to write an article, it just didn't happen. I was trying to, the short film was the right, and I never turned back once I was on that. It was totally not happening, exploring that in the writing, like I originally thought I would do, because I'm a writer. It didn't happen. It's happening in the short film. I don't know if that answers the question at all. It's just.
No, I think it does, and we're going to take one last question, and then...
Take two, 'cause the other
Oh,
one
there's a
is
second
from
one
my
back here.
sister, Dr. Marisa Dunn, and I don't
Oh.
want any family drama.
No,
so
you can't have that
that's
happen,
the
so
last one.
we'll take two. We'll take two more.
Then we're good.
Yes, so we'll start here, and then we'll make our way back there. So, and then we'll finish up from there.
I don't really have a question, Dr. Dunn. I just so appreciated hearing you read this story, and just want to say that if your publisher wants to make, I like books and being able to read books, but if they argue for an audio book, you should definitely be the one.
We are discussing that, because I did say to them I would want to read it myself. You know, I was like, I know y'all haven't heard me read the publisher. I was like, but I think I read okay, so I would, I think I could read. So we're actually, you know, trying to get that all set up and squared away. So thank you so much for saying that.
Okay. So one more last question?
But her and Lisa Cook, because I live with these people, like
okay,
she crossed
then
the street
there
from me,
we
and I
go
don't
then.
want her to give me the evil, like, you didn't even recognize me. But Dr. Marisa Dunn, my sister, thank you, sis.
Oh, I have nothing. I just had a kind of a quick little question, like, who bought you your first library card? It was me.
My sister did model a devotion to reading. Okay, Big Sis did model that. And so I definitely
Okay.
applaud her shameless clapping on the back, because that was absolutely a true story. So, yes, bowing down. And then Lisa Cook last.
I have two questions.
Yes.
First is, which of your characters is most like you and why?
No. So it's so funny, because what we tell students is that don't try to write yourself literally. You're always drawing from real experience through other people, stories, histories, all of that stuff, but you never want to be bound by it, because characters got to be themselves. It's got to be real on their own, unless you're writing a memoir, and then that's something different. But, and so it's funny, because I would say the knee-jerk reaction is to say probably Nia, even though she's so unlike me in so other ways. So don't, you know, there are things about her that was not like specifically true to me, but I think in terms of her thinking, that was true to me. But there's a little Miracle Ruth, because I feel like that's an ode to my church girl, you know, upbringing, you know, like, right, it's, you know, even her name, Miracle Ruth, there's something about, like, Miracle Ruth is just very cool, and a lot of people like Miracle Ruth. They were like, she's the one. She's the young girl who, like, sounds like her grandmother, because she's being raised by her grandmother, and her grandmother's always quoting scriptures, and so does she, you know, right? But she's this computer girl, and this whole thing, and she always wears pink, because one of my very best friends used to always wear pink, Tirota, baby. Every day, something had to be pink. So you see how something real is, Rip, because for years, every day, something was pink. And so I didn't know it was going to find its way into the novel, but Miracle Ruth wears something pink every day. Every day. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Dr. Brown, I just thank you so much. Thank you so much. And your lovely companion that I'm meeting for the first time, and she came out too, and I'm just really honored that you came out. And thanks to my family and friends, my mom and my auntie are here in the front row, and sister friends, you know, from work and home, so I'm really appreciative. I know it's Tuesday, there's so many competing things. I was invited to 3 or 4 things myself, that people were salty about. I was like, well, I have my own book thing to come to. So I really, really appreciate you for coming out and supporting the book. And Dr. Brown, I thank you so much. You are truly, I'm saying this honestly, you have been welcome to Morehouse. It's just been a year, I think now, has it not, colleagues? Is it just now? A year and a half. We have baptized you in the fire and in water and all manner of things, and you have, hasn't he shored up mightily? So doing this is just proof of how you just continue to model great leadership, thoughtful leadership, and we really do appreciate it. Those are true words. I'm not even getting paid to say those. That is actually the truth. So thank you so much for this, but for your leadership in bringing a level of calm and just, order, all of that.
And Dr. Dunn, thank you so much for sharing your gift with all of us and engaging us all in conversation about this wonderful book. Thank you so much.